Our scriptures, Nehemiah chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. And in just a few moments, I'll read that passage for us. It goes along with the beautiful passage from Ephesians that Janet read for us just a few moments ago. Not sure what you did yesterday morning, but when I get up yesterday morning, I heard the news about Jimmy Buffett. It's hard to believe we've been talking about him all month and then get the news this week that he passed away. But after my devotional time, I actually put on my Jimmy Buffett playlist and sat and listened to it in the wee hours of the morning. And it was even more meaningful than it was when I listened to it in preparation for last month's series. So I'm glad that we had that time and those conversations together. Now this morning, I was up early, and after the devotional time, I flipped on my YouTube Sunday morning worship playlist, and the first song out of the gate was I Surrender All by the Isaacs. And they were singing a partly a cappella rendition, Mike, and it was absolutely gorgeous. And that instrumental of one of the great old hymns was wonderful, reminding all of us that we have an opportunity to continually surrender our all to Christ. When we become followers of Jesus, we are saved not into oblivion or not to a remote island, but we are saved to become a part of a team, a part of a community, a part of a spiritual family. In the Old Testament, long before Jesus came into the world, there's a story that certainly informs both our determination and our cooperation, and it's found in Nehemiah 4. It's one of my favorite stories from the Old Testament. And if you haven't read it recently, it's about the rebuilding of the temple and all the obstacles they faced in that rebuilding saga. And yet it was their determination and their dependence on God that saw them through. So whatever you're rebuilding in your life, whatever cohesive community you're looking for, consider this text and listen to the words of determination. Beginning in verse 1 in the NIV, when Sanballat heard that they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, he said, "What are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stories back to life from those heaps of rubble burned as they are?" Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, "What are they building? Even a fox climbing up on it would break down their wall of stones." Hear us, O God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders. So we rebuild the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. I love the way this is worded in the King James Version in verse 6. The people were confessing, so we built the wall, and all the wall was joined together unto the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work. As we start our series on teamwork, there are a couple who had to be out of town that said, "Man, I hate to miss that. I need to hear it." And yet, I understand on Labor Day weekend, when we live in a world where many begrudge work, we honor not only the work we do in our vocation and the work that many of us do in acts of service, but we also turn our attention for a few minutes to the work that we do in cooperation with the mission of God in the world. Andrew Carnegie loved to say that teamwork is the ability to work together toward a common vision, the ability to direct individual accomplishments toward organizational objectives. And then he added, teamwork is the fuel that allows common people to attain uncommon results. Teamwork is the fuel that allows uncommon people to achieve uncommon results. Well, the ancient people of faith in the Old Testament succeeded in rebuilding the wall and eventually rebuilding the temple because they had a mindset to work. And not just to work, but to work together as a team. All throughout September, we're going to be talking about the importance of teamwork. For kingdom work is always teamwork. Each Sunday, we'll take a look at a biblical aspect of teamwork as we're equipped and encouraged to be good team members in our work, in our church, and in our community. Now, in this passage from Nehemiah, we witness the challenges and the opposition Nehemiah and his fellow workers faced as they embarked on this great task of rebuilding the wall at Jerusalem. It was through their determination and through their overcoming faith that we discover vital principles that inspire us to navigate the obstacles in our own life and the life of our church and to fulfill the work that God has called us to do. But it begins with how we think, how we see things. It begins with our determination. George Bernard Shaw loved to say, those that cannot change their mind cannot change anything. Reminds us of that passage from Romans 12:1 that says that we are not to be conformed to the world, but to be transformed by the renewing of our minds to do that good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. So for just a few minutes on this Labor Day weekend, let me offer these words of encouragement with maybe a couple of stories sprinkled in. If you're a follower of Jesus, I hope you can identify with these aspects of teamwork and mission. But if you're not yet a follower of Jesus, I hope you'll consider not only following Jesus in your daily life, but connecting with a local church here or nearby where you can use your energies and your talents and your spiritual gifts to be a part of God's initiatives in the world. First, it's important to embrace the vision. Nehemiah was called to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, which was an extraordinarily monumental task. Some said it was impossible. Similarly, God calls us to rebuild the broken aspects of our lives, our communities, and our relationships, and sometimes even to rebuild the walls or the temple of our church. Well, just as Nehemiah received a vision from God, we too must seek God's guidance and vision for the work that God has entrusted us with. A divine vision can ignite our passion and become the foundation for a journey of restoration and reconciliation and rebuilding. But like Nehemiah, we need to hear a clear and God-inspired vision for the work that we're called to do. Like Nehemiah, we can't be sidetracked or discouraged by skepticism, by mockery, by obstacles, by adversaries, but instead to cling to God's vision even when God's vision unfolds at a slower pace than what we'd anticipated. We cling to the vision that God has placed in our hearts, in our lives, in our homes, and in our congregation. By the way, speaking of how we see things, whether we see the glass half full or half empty, whether we see God's vision as half complete or half incomplete, Jimmy Buffett was interviewed a few years ago and he said, I try to see the positive side of things, for it takes just as little time to see the positive side of life as it does to see the negative side. In other words, it takes just as much time to see the positive side of family as it does to see the negative side of family. It takes just as much time to see the positive side of your work as it does the negative side of your work. It takes just as much time to see the positive side of your church as it does the negative side of your church. And the one you spend the most time with is the one you will articulate the most. Embrace the vision. God has a vision for our lives, God has a vision for our communities, and God has a vision for our congregations. And here at Wieuca, we believe that God gave us a vision in 2019 that our church endorsed with great enthusiasm. And we were anticipating that that vision would unfold quickly, and we didn't know the obstacles we would face in the days ahead. So here's the question. Do we still see things positively, or do we see things negatively? Without dwelling there too much, let me park there for a moment, because it's important as we move into the fall of this year and pledge ourselves in new ways to be good members of God's team. It's important that we understand exactly what the obstacles are. Now, if you're new to Wieuca, this won't mean anything to you, but part of the obstacle we faced have been with some neighbors who haven't been cooperative with the city or with the church. In fact, they filed a legal action to prevent the vision of the church from going forward. You didn't expect that. I didn't expect that. But if we believe that God works in all things to bring about good, then we have to stay the course and see the positive even amidst the challenges. Now, having been here for over 3.5 years, the real danger of not fulfilling God's vision has nothing to do with the neighbors. It has nothing to do with the lawsuit. It has to do with our church family and only our church family. Let me give you two extremes, both from my days of playing football or being on the sidelines. Football season started this way, so I'm thinking about some of those stories and what I learned from them. Years after I'd spent time in the ministry, I'd been a high school team chaplain for a while. I'd been the team chaplain at Jacksonville State, so when I moved to Kentucky, they asked me to be the team chaplain for what was then Cumberland College. It's now called University of the Cumberlands. But I was on the sidelines, and they were rebuilding the program, and the boys worked hard, the coaches worked hard. I had great respect and appreciation for them, and they were playing the previous year's conference winner, and I thought they had given it their all. But on the sidelines, we were standing there, and all we could hear from some of the stands were outrageous fans screaming at the coach, "You didn't call the right play. You should have gone for it on first down. Put in number 22. He's a better runner than 24. And one of the guys on the sideline turned to me and said, "Rev, I understand why they're not cheering, but do they not understand how hard we worked to get here and that they're just spectators?" One of the things that will keep God's mission from coming to pass here is people deciding they're just going to be spectators. They're going to sit in the stands and watch others do the work and then critique whether they're doing it right. And if we choose to be spectators rather than team members, we're going to ensure the demise of the mission. It's important to be a member of the team that's determined and cooperative. And we live in a world where we don't have the luxury of spectator religion. God has called us to be participants in His mission, to use our spiritual gifts and our talents, and to roll up our sleeves and get the job done. So the first challenge is don't be a spectator, be a participant. Second challenge is be a cooperative participant and run the play that's called. What do you mean, Pastor? Well, I played a little football. I was not very good. I married the real athlete in our family. Let's just be honest about that. But she never played football. I was in the 10th grade. I got to dress for 4 varsity games, and I was playing B team at a home game, and the assistant coach, Coach Harden, was our coach. He was also a great math teacher. I was playing tight end, and on the plays I wasn't playing tight end, I was playing on the defensive line. In our little school, you played both offense and defense. Well, we were playing a really good team, and we were in the game. It was almost tied. And Coach Harden was calling the best plays that he could, but he sent in a play to the quarterback. The quarterback called the play, and everyone in the huddle was grumbling. And I won't call his name, but the wide receiver that played the other side of where I was playing his tight end said, "I don't like that play. I want us to run such and such." Well, all of a sudden in the huddle, the team is divided because the coach has called the play, but one of the players is calling another play, and the players in the huddle were trying to decide, do you run the play the coach has called, or do you run the play that a player on the field called because they think they know more than the coach? And when we went up to the line, we were trying to rush to keep from getting a delay of game penalty. About a half of the team ran the play the receiver had called, and a half ran the play that the coach had called. And we looked like a bunch of misfits running all over the place. And because no one blocked on the right side of the line because they didn't know which play was being run, the running back fumbled, and it fell right at the feet of the wide receiver who had tried to call the alternative play to start with, and we gave the team the other ball on the 10-yard line, and they ended up beating us 16-14. All because a player on the field thought they knew more than the quarterback, and they knew more than the coach. For the last several years, both prior to my retirement in Pensacola and since then, I've worked with churches that were trying to revitalize and churches that were looking forward to a new day and a fresh start. And there's so many wonderful things about the spirit of a fresh start that we're enjoying, and God is sending new friends our way. But we have two risks, and those risks have nothing to do with the court system or the neighbors or the attorneys. It has all to do with us. We can't afford to be spectators, and we can't afford to have 20 quarterbacks in the congregation. Someone has to call the play. Now, here's the real catch. After the game, Coach Harden was a real gentleman. He didn't say much, but he finally said, "What happened in that play?" And somebody said, "Well, so-and-so called a different play." "Why would they do that?" He said, "Well, I saw an opening." He was on the side and did see an opening, but he only saw about 50 yards of the field. The coach had a spotter in the press box and could see the entire field, and the play he called was a play that would have scored a touchdown because the defense hadn't been covering the receiver on the other side. What happens when a person who doesn't have the whole perspective and they don't see the whole playing field, they become a disruptor rather than a team member? I want to challenge us going forward that we will not only be participants, we'll be determined and cooperative participants. And we will listen to the quarterback and we'll run the play that's called so that we're all moving in the same direction. Years ago, when I was doing youth work, we would play literally Red Rover, if you can believe that. The middle schoolers loved it. But then we had a tug of war. And they would try to divide up teams, and everybody wanted the strongest people on their side, and we'd have to divide the team up so that the tug of war had an even number of people on each side of the rope. Usually at the youth retreat, particularly at the Cecil Day Center in North Georgia, we took kids for several years, when you had the tug of war, it was over this mud pit. And what often happened is they tugged and they tugged and they tugged, and if one didn't prevail, they each tugged each other to where both sides ended up in the mud pit, covered with mud. That's what happens when people aren't all pulling in the same direction. When you start pulling against the mission and against the vision in your work, in your home, in your community, and in your church, everybody loses. Embrace the vision. The vision God has given us is durable. The vision God has given us is more than relevant, but it's important that we commit to that vision. What happened in Sanballat's day was he looked at the people and began to ridicule them because they were smaller, they had a gargantuan task, and no one believed they would accomplish it. But read the rest of Nehemiah. Not only did they accomplish it, but they celebrated the accomplishment because they knew what a great feat had been done. For sure it took longer, for sure it was harder, but it was a work that God blessed. Embrace the vision. How do you respond to adversaries in your life? Respond with prayer. When we face challenges and opposition in life, our first response should always be prayer. Just as Nehemiah turned to God, we must bring our concerns and our doubts and our fears before God's throne of grace. Prayer does at least two things. First of all, prayer keeps us focused. It becomes the middle C of our mission. Prayer brings us back to staying in tune with what the work of God is all about. Because if we're not prayerful, we get to thinking we know more than other people. We get to thinking we know more than God. I'm amazed at teaching prayer through the years of the many people who've said to me after we've studied prayer, I really thought prayer was me trying to convince God to see that my way was right. And as I listen to them, as ludicrous as that sound, I've seen evidence of that in my own life. How about you? That if God would just listen to me, I could tell God how it's better done. But prayer as a focus point brings us into alignment with God's will. Prayer keeps us focused, and prayer is uniting. Prayer puts us in the position of harmony so that we're working together, so that in that tug of rope analogy, we're all pulling in the same direction against the weight of the opposition and not pulling against each other. Respond with prayer. Prayer keeps us focused on that important work God has called us to do. Third, overcome discouragement. In the world in which we live, every one of us needs to hear that over and over again. There's discouragement on every turn. Discouragement with our health. Discouragement with our work. Discouragement with our school. Any task, any vision, any mission worth its salt has discouraging moments. When you and I face discouragement, remember that our labor is not in vain in the Lord. Our faithfulness and our perseverance lead to a harvest of God's blessings. And just as Nehemiah's efforts in leading the people led to the rebuilding of the walls, whatever mission God places before us, when we pray over it, when we commit ourselves to it, when we're a part of the team working with determination and cooperation, every time something discouraging happens, we work even harder because we know the end result. We don't give up easily. And fourth, remember, mindset really does matter. The phrase, a mind to work, is probably one of my favorite phrases in all the Old Testament, alongside the Lord is my shepherd. It highlights the importance of our mental mindset. Now, I wish I could tell you, we're going to decide today, I'm going to have a positive mindset, I'm going to do what Jesus wants me to do, I'm going to align my life with the will of God. The problem is we have to do it all over again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, because by default, we lose our focus. Our mindset is something that we continue to recommit to. We continually have to upgrade. We have to get our mind fixed and our mind just right in every endeavor, everything worth having. Years ago, I was doing some marriage counseling sessions. Someone asked me if I'd listened to the Jerry Lee Lewis tape, and I had not. And I listened to a long before podcast, a 8-track tape of Jerry Lee Lewis talking about marriage. And Jerry Lee Lewis said not long after one of his marriages, he realized that marriage wasn't easy. And someone said, how do you cope with that? He said, it's easy. I just put the wedding tape on in reverse and play it backward. We're going out of the church rather than coming in. Well, unfortunately, in life, you can't uncommit to what you've committed to. It requires endurance. It requires perseverance. It requires mutual support. Remember that mindset matters. We're called to focus on the mission and not on personal preference. A team cannot prioritize preference. What often happens in a team, especially in a consumer culture, is we're so accustomed to getting what we want. I know I've told you this before. By the way, our wedding anniversary is coming up Thursday of this week. I've heard others say it. We live it every day. The hardest decision we have to make in life is where we're going to go and eat. Because she says, where do you want to go for lunch? And I say, I don't know, where do you want to go? Or I'll say, where do you want to go? I don't know, where do you want to go? Carl Hurley, the Christian humorist who followed Jerry Clower and Grady Nutt, said there really is a restaurant, and I found it in Attala, Alabama. Had a sign out front. The name of the restaurant was, I don't know, where do you want to go? And they were overflowing with business because when somebody said, where do you want to go? I don't know, where do you want to go? That was the restaurant they went to. Well, sometimes in life, it's, I don't know, where do you want to go? Well, we're spoiled. We pick out the clothes that we want. We get to pick out the car that we drive. We pick out the hairstylist we want to go to. And then we give ourselves over to being followers of Jesus when God doesn't care what we want. It's a residual falsehood of the prosperity gospel that when you accept Jesus and commit to following him, he wants to give you what you want. Part of last week's text was deny yourself. Take up your cross and follow me. Deny what you want for the greater good of what God wants for the whole body. And as a team, you never push for what you want. You're always trying to discern what God wants. Where is God leading us? And how can we join hands, pull our weight in the same direction to get to where God is leading us? Because, finally, when we work together, it's unifying and it's uplifting. The people here in Nehemiah were determined to work, to collaborate, and unite for a common purpose. Their mind to work was not simply about their intellectual decision to a deep commitment. It was a call to action. This principle teaches us the importance of having a resolute mindset, that we work together in harmony, supporting and uplifting one another as fellow stragglers on the road to God's mission. Steve Maraboli, the motivational speaker, says, once your mindset changes, everything on the outside will change along with it. What does he mean? Well, here in this passage, once your mindset changes to, I want to be a part of the team as long as the team is doing what I like, what I want, what I support. And we decide I want to be a part of the team because God is involved in the team. And this is going to take me some places that I'm not sure I want to go. And this is going to lead me to do some things I'm not sure I want to do. And this is going to cause me to work with some people that I'm not sure I can get along with. That is kingdom work. And the change of mindset that says we're going to work together as kingdom partners is one of the most important decisions we ever make beyond deciding to follow Jesus. Because when we work together, that collaborative endeavor becomes unifying and uplifting. So this morning, as we look back on Nehemiah's journey, let us remember that the work God calls us to individually and as a congregation may not always be easy. There will be opposition. There will be doubts. There will be obstacles. Yet just as Nehemiah and his team persevered, we can overcome challenges through a determined mindset that's rooted in God's promises. This is the first week of football season. As a kid growing up in North Alabama, it didn't matter if you rooted for Auburn or Alabama or Georgia Tech. We were all influenced by the philosophy of Coach Paul Bear Bryant. On one of his Sunday afternoon TV shows, while they were drinking Coca-Cola and eating Golden Flake potato chips, the interviewer asked Coach Bryant, how can you build a team out of such scrawny, untalented players? And Coach Bryant said, over the years, I've learned how to hold a team together, how to lift some men up, how to calm others down until finally they have one heartbeat and together they become a team. When a church moves forward to seize a grand opportunity like God has placed before us, God wants to fire some of us up and calm some of us down until we have one heartbeat. A heart that beats with the passion of Jesus, and we become a team, a kingdom team that accomplishes great things for God in the world and in our community. It begins when we decide to follow Jesus, and it continues when we decide to be a part of the work God is doing in the world. This morning, as we conclude our time of worship, we want to sing that age-old hymn that says, there is a Redeemer. But as we prepare to stand and sing for just a few moments, let me give you this invitation. During September, the cross that's been on the communion table will be located on the welcome table in the back. And if there's a decision you would like to discuss about church membership, about becoming a follower of Jesus, or about being baptized, we invite you to meet one of our ministers at the cross. Every week, one of our ministers and maybe one of our deacons will be situated near the cross, and we'll be there to talk with you, to pray with you, to counsel you on your decision, and to help you find the best way to implement God's leadership in your life. Now, as we prepare for a great week, let's stand together and sing about the Redeemer who loves us more than we can imagine. Would you stand and join with Rick?